All right, let's talk about something that gets every football fan fired up: money. We're going to dive deep into the new economics of the beautiful game, a pretty wild world of sovereign wealth funds, private equity, and just eye-watering levels of debt that have completely changed the sport we love.
So, let's just get right to it with the big question that seems like a total contradiction, right? You hear about clubs like Manchester United or Barcelona being over $1 billion in debt, but at the same time, their owners are some of the richest people on the planet. I mean, how does that even make sense?
To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to unpack what feels like a paradox. And the key is understanding that in the world of big-time finance, debt and profit aren't really enemies. In fact, a lot of the time, they're partners.
So here's the absolute crucial point. Debt and profit are two totally different concepts. You can have a mountain of debt, but as long as the money you're bringing in is big enough to cover your interest payments and all your other costs, you can still be incredibly profitable. And this is a perfect way to think about it. You wouldn't call a doctor with $1 million mortgage broke, right? Of course not. That debt is what allows them to own a super valuable asset. Well, football clubs are running on the exact same principle, just with a whole lot more zeros.
So, how on earth did we get here? How did football go from being about local community clubs to these massive global financial machines? Well, the answer really boils down to a couple of key moments that changed the game forever.
You know, before the 90s, clubs were mostly just local institutions. But then, two things happened that were like seismic shocks to the system. First, in '92, the Premier League was born, and it came with that game-changing TV deal with Sky. And then, just 3 years later, the Bosman ruling completely shifted the power dynamic, giving players freedom like never before.
And that first TV deal, it wasn't just big. It was a revolution. It basically turned on a fire hose of cash that nobody had ever seen before. In just 30 years, the value of those TV rights has exploded by more than 20 times. That river of money turned football clubs from sports teams into global media assets.
And you know what happens when that kind of money shows up, right? You get a whole new breed of investor. The local businessmen were out, and in came the global billionaires, the private equity sharks, and even entire countries. And each of them brought a totally different playbook. Let's start with a classic model, one that's pretty infamous if you're a Man United fan, the leveraged buyout, or LBO. This is basically where an investor uses a ton of borrowed money to buy a company, and here's the kicker: they use the company they're buying as the collateral for the loan. And this table shows you the brutal genius of it all. The Glazers bought a completely debt-free Manchester United for almost £800 million, but they only put in about a quarter of that themselves. The rest? They borrowed it and loaded it directly onto the club's books. So in reality, Manchester United was forced to buy itself, and it's been paying off that debt ever since. And if you want to understand the mindset that can come with an LBO, you just have to listen to this one infamous quote from a former top exec. It kind of reveals the new philosophy. The club is a cash machine, and the brand is so big that winning, while nice, isn't actually essential to making money anymore.
Okay, so that's one model. Now let's look at something a little different, but just as powerful: the private equity approach. And there's no better example than the takeover of Chelsea for over £4 billion.
The private equity playbook is all about one thing: financial engineering to juice the value. So you see aggressive player trading, clever accounting tricks like those super long contracts to spread out costs, and they see the youth academy as a factory for pure profit sales. But here's the absolute most important part: the exit plan. This isn't a passion project. The goal is to bulk up the club's value and flip it for a huge profit in 5 to 7 years. And then you have the newest and most powerful players in the entire game: sovereign wealth funds. This is when an entire country, using its massive state-owned investment fund, decides to buy a football club.
See, for owners like Saudi Arabia's fund at Newcastle or Qatar's at PSG, the goals are way bigger than just making a profit. They're using football to build what's called soft power and international influence, to diversify their own economies away from oil, and to build a lasting legacy. This isn't about financial returns. This is geopolitics played out on a football pitch.
Okay, so we've met the new owners. But with these absolutely insane transfer fees and wages, how do clubs even make the numbers work and stay within the rules? Well, let's pull back the curtain on the financial tools they're using.
One of the most important tools in their toolbox is something called amortization. Let's say a club buys a player for 60 million euros. Now, instead of that massive 60 million euro hit on their books in 1 year, they get to spread that cost over the length of the player's contract. So, on a 5-year deal, it only shows up as a $12 million expense each year. It makes the books look a whole lot healthier than they might actually be.
But what happens when a club is desperate for a huge pile of cash, like right now, and the traditional banks are saying, no way? Well, a new player has entered the game: private credit. You can think of these firms as specialist lenders who aren't afraid of complicated, risky loans, the kind a normal bank would run a mile from.
And you can see this in action all over Europe. Barcelona famously sold off its future TV rights for cash today. Inter Milan took out a loan that eventually cost them ownership of the entire club. And you see other teams borrowing against money they expect to get from future player sales. It is a high-stakes game, trading future security for cash in the present.
So when you put all of this together, the leveraged buyouts, the private equity strategies, the goals of sovereign wealth funds, it forces you to step back and ask a really fundamental question about what football is even becoming. Is it still a sport, or is it just another asset for investors to trade?
But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be this way. Just look at Germany, where they have the 50+1 rule. It basically guarantees that the club's members, the fans, always have the final say. And what does that lead to? Lower ticket prices, a real focus on the community, and prioritizing the integrity of the sport over pure profit. It proves that this whole financialization thing, it's a choice, not something that's inevitable.
And that choice comes with some pretty big risks. You've got accusations of sports washing, where nations use clubs to clean up their image. You have fans who feel totally disconnected, like they're just customers now. And you get this massive, growing gap between the super-rich clubs and everybody else, which really hurts competition. So, at the end of the day, here's where we're at. Football is changing from a community passion into a global, multi-billion-dollar asset class, and the sport is at a crossroads. The chase for trophies is now completely tangled up with the chase for profit. And that forces all of us, fans, leagues, everyone, to ask a simple but really powerful question. What's the real price of victory?